President Trump signed an executive order last week that would mandate voters to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote. The order claims the United States, quote, fails to enforce basic and necessary election protections. If enacted, voters will need to produce documents like a passport or a birth certificate to prove citizenship.
Critics of the directive say it will add another hurdle to voting, blocking millions from registering because not everyone has the proper documentation. Voting advocates also question the president's legal authority to make these changes, as states normally have the power over voting rules. Joining us now is Virginia Kase Solomón, the president and CEO of Common Cause, a voting rights advocacy group based in Washington. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what is your argument here? I think a lot of people would say, well, isn't it not particularly controversial to say that only citizens should be voting and that it's all right to ask people to produce evidence to that effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think at face value, it sounds really simple, right? I think the issue that we see with this is that it creates more hurdles and barriers to voting for far too many people. It's already illegal to vote if you're not a citizen. That's the first and foremost. And it's not like we've seen that this has been a massive issue. There have been claims that have been unsubstantiated by people on the far right, including Donald Trump and this administration. But what it does is, by having this evidentiary proof of citizenship, well, it disenfranchises a lot of people. And I'll give an example. There are 69 million women in this country, including myself, who have changed their last name because of their marriage. My birth certificate no longer matches my driver's license. I don't have the ability to prove with my birth certificate that would be the case, that I'm actually legally a citizen here. Now, they haven't said that marriage certificates would be acceptable. What about senior citizens? What if you've been married for 50 years, tracking down a marriage certificate, even if they said that was acceptable? The other thing is, the reality is that there are far too many people in this country who actually don't even have a passport. And this would disproportionately impact red states and Republicans because Democrats, by and large, actually hold more passports than Republicans do. So you have this complicated set of issues where not everybody could produce that amount of documentation or the necessary documentation to prove their citizenship in this country. I think the other thing that is really important to note with this is that there's a lot of restrictions when it comes to receiving ballots after Election Day. That would be gone. So if you're a military service member, if you're a foreign service worker, and you're depending on the post office to be able to get your ballot in on time, guess what? Just not getting there by one day, and we all know how the mail gets held up. Well, guess what? You too would not be able to have your vote counted. So there's a lot of different issues with this particular executive order that give a lot of pause. And on top of that, it ultimately is just an overreach. Congress and the states are the only ones who currently have the power to set election law. It should not be in the hands of any president, not this president, not a president in the future. No president should actually have the ability to be able to provide that information.
And just to be clear, Virginia, I mean, it seems to me that this is one of these instances where there are two rights or prerogatives that are in a degree of tension with each other. One is obviously everyone wants elections to be secure. Nobody wants votes cast by people who shouldn't properly be permitted to cast those votes. And on the other hand, no one wants people who should be entitled to vote to be disenfranchised. And there was a legal battle about this, as you remember, in Virginia last year, where the suggestion was that people were being thrown off the voter rolls with insufficient time to prove that that was the wrong decision and prove that they were entitled to vote. So your position, as I understand it is more dangerous, or it is disproportionate to have this danger of disenfranchisement. And that is out of whack or out of scale with the actual issue, the problematic issue of people, a small number of people casting ballots that they shouldn't be entitled to do.
Absolutely. I mean, 153 million people voted in the last presidential election, just to give you an example. If 69 million people, women in this country who are married women, didn't have the ability to get that documentary proof of citizenship in place, that's disenfranchising almost half of the people who voted. And not to say that it would impact every one of those individuals, but it would just create this extra hurdle and barrier that was unnecessary. If you have people who are scrambling to try and prove who they are for a variety of reasons, for example, if you're a rural voter, if you're a senior citizen, all of these are issues, not to mention the fact that if you're somebody who is born overseas to American parents, the additional hoops and barriers that you would have to go through just to be able to prove that, it just impacts far too many people and would do too much harm.
It impacts a lot of people, certainly. Yeah, the argument is a little bit like, yes, they could make it somewhat more difficult to go through a process of obtaining a voter registration card, and then that would result in certain people not voting. I guess I always say to conservatives that it's not even clear that this is, if we're just talking in narrow tactical political terms, going to be beneficial to them. Increasingly, as you noted, conservative voters are becoming more of the just if all eligible voters voted, I think that would have benefited Trump, is some data I saw on that last week, whereas highly motivated, very intelligent, very show up even for off season elections are increasingly the very dedicated Democratic or anti-Trump leaning people. So I think all of that makes sense on a tactical argument, why maybe focusing on registration issues is not good for the conservative movement. But they might also just say, look, it's a privilege to be able to vote, and if it's harder to get that verified, if you got to jump through more steps, that's okay by me. I'm saying this is what a person on the right might say, and how would you respond to that argument?
Yeah, I would argue first by saying it's not a privilege. It's actually a constitutional right that is afforded to all of us in this country as long as you meet the qualifications. And so it's something that we all should be looking at as a right in this country. As long as you meet all of the guidelines that are set forth in your state, as long as you meet all of the requirements, you should be able to. And proving citizenship when you've already been born in this country, especially for people who have been voting for a long time already, especially for senior citizens and other people who it would become way, way harder for, why would you intentionally create those barriers? But I think the other thing with this executive order, and this is the part that I think, especially people on the right who say, well, this is good, this is important. I think what we also want to remember is that states have the rights to set election law in their states as much as Congress does. And this would give Elon Musk, Doge, and Department of Homeland Security the ability to go into private state voter rolls, private state voter rolls. And the reality is that we should not have anybody going to state voter databases. That is a privacy issue. And I think that that's something that everybody should take really seriously. Why should somebody from the federal government be able to come in, look at state voting data, and determine whether or not they think somebody should or could have been eligible to vote? It reeks of overreach in a million different ways. But I think the one that a lot of people should also be paying attention to, not is just that documentary proof of citizenship, but it's the impact on your privacy and going into your very personal data. And I think that that is wrong. Nobody should be looking at how people voted.
Virginia, just one other point which you've already alluded to, but in relation to these new provisions or orders as far as voting by mail is concerned, to summarize it, the Trump position is that mail-in votes that have been postmarked before Election Day would not be accepted if they arrive after Election Day. And one of the pushbacks against that is that there are obviously a number of states that overwhelmingly vote by mail, Washington State, I think Oregon. But if the Trump order went into effect, it would have the consequence of bringing Election Day essentially forward for those states, because you would have to send in your mail-in ballot some days before Election Day, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it's almost like, and who can control the mail? We've seen, I mean, I will just say personally, I got a Christmas card in February this year that somebody had sent out to me. We know the mail doesn't always show up on time, and there is no opportunity for people to be able to cure those ballots if it's gone by a day, if the mail is slowed down, if there is some kind of a natural disaster. We know that we go right into hurricane season in the South for example, and in Florida and states like Texas and other places, Louisiana, where the mail can be impacted. And so there's just far too many concerns when people are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're getting their ballot in on time. And if it's still not received, there should be a period of time after Election Day where people have the ability to make sure that their voice is still heard, because they don't get to control the mail. They only get to control when they put their ballot in.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next is Russiagate resurfacing. Special guest will explain. Stay tuned.